Today's event is going to be how to get hired now, tips from recruiters and hiring managers, sponsored by CDW. CDW is the leading multi-brand technology solutions provider to business, government, education, and healthcare organizations. We're thrilled to be joined by these three recruiting and hiring managers at CDW to hear their best advice on how you can apply, interview, and wow your way into your dream role in 2022. So thank you, Kirsten, Alexis, and Tammy for joining us today. Kirsten, if you wanted to kick us off, introduce yourself, tell us about your background and what you do at CDW.
Yeah, thank you, Louise. So I'm Kirsten Posey, and I am an ISA for configurations at CDW. And that is essentially a customer-facing role that goes over our configuration services at CDW and gives advice and also scope of work for customers coming to us. Previously, I was a technician actually at our distribution center, also working in configurations. So I was in kind of the warehouse zone as far as our distribution center.
Awesome. Happy to have you on today's discussion. Tammy?
Yes. Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me here today. Appreciate it. I'm looking forward to this discussion. So I'm Tammy Nieholt. I've been with CDW for 11 plus years. Most of my years has been spent in management, so hiring, lots of experience there. For 11 years, I was with our service operations. So any professional services that was done, my team would take care of all the setup and make sure that revenue and all that good financial stuff would run correctly. Today, I'm now the senior manager of our commissions team. So my team works on making sure that we get our sellers paid and our bonuses out in a quickly, timely fashion, right? All of that depends on what we do. So I'm excited to be here again. So thank you.
Awesome. Happy to have you on today's discussion as well. Thanks. And then Alexis, last but not least.
Hi, everybody. My name is Alexis Brown. First, thank you all so much for having me and for attending this event. I'm really excited to connect with you today. So traditionally, I have about 4 years of recruiting experience before coming to CDW. I started out as a contractor and was blessed to be able to roll full-time as a coworker, which was really exciting. As far as the skill sets that I support, so traditionally, I am more on the professional services side, specifically supporting our delivery engineers. So that could be in the networking space, it could be on the enterprise side, wireless, virtualization, definitely lots of options there. And then I also support the Associate Consulting Engineering program, which is essentially like an on-the-job training program for CDW, really geared towards candidates that are more junior to mid-level for experience. But yeah, really excited to be here today talking to you all. Really excited to share some tips and tricks for you and kind of jump on in.
Awesome. Great to have you as well, Alexis. And if you wanted to get started, Alexis, I wanted to know, what your thoughts were on, the knowledge of the current job market. What are some hiring trends that you see in 2022?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for that, Luis. I'd say more traditionally, what I would see is kind of pockets of skill sets that I think are booming right now for sure. So on my side, as far as the professional services go, I think cybersecurity is definitely an industry that is gaining a lot of traction and there's a lot of interest there. I'd say, we're opening roles daily in that space. It could be due to, more organic or inorganic growth as it relates to CDW, but lots of openings there. I would also say, specifically when it comes to hiring trends, I think more so on the candidate experience side, everyone wants to work remote, right? I mean, just with the nature of the world that we've been living in recently and wanting to continue operating in that capacity, definitely very hot as far as requirements that prospective applicants share with me as being very important to them. And last but not least, what I would say as far as hiring trends go, I think naturally, again, this could be in relation to the world that we're living in, but I think some hiring managers, and Tammy may be able to kind of add to this, but really like to kind of see candidates ideally come in and absorb as much information and kind of hit the ground running. So I'd say that is definitely an area as far as hiring trends go. And I'm talking to my hiring leaders, they're looking to see, hey, have has this candidate done a specific project that's very similar to what we're looking for now, and kind of further understanding what that looks like. So I'd say cybersecurity, definitely very hot. I'd say definitely as far as the candidate experience and being able to provide any insight there along the way, lots of trends that we're seeing in 2022 for sure.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And yeah, Tammy, if you wanted to, in that same vein, what are some of those hiring trends that you're seeing this year?
Sure. I think for, flexibility, not just remote, but also flexibility in their hours, split times. Some want to be where we traditionally have always had full-time roles on the teams that I've managed. Are there flexibility to do part-time, split days, things like that? I also think there's a culture of, the compensation, right? They want to make sure that they're receiving fair and adequate compensation. So there's a lot of research that I've seen where candidates have done, just research online looking to see what that would be. But I think the biggest piece today that I see is the flexibility to what Alexis said, the remote, right? That allows that flexibility in one of the biggest ways possible. But I also think that they're looking for someone to help guide them into what the strength might be for them. I've had some candidates that didn't even realize what their true strength or weakness was, and take a candidate on and get them into a role that fit their strengths. So sometimes they don't even realize what they're looking at or for when they interview, but you can sometimes just capture that right out of them and kind of guide them along the way.
Awesome. I think I need some help figuring out what my strengths are as well, Tammy. So if you wanted to, if we had some time at the end of the call, if you could make an assessment on me as well, I might need some of that. Great. Thank you. Thank you for those insights. As well as Kirsten, did you have any insights for 2022?
Yeah, and definitely some of what Tammy mentioned, the flexibility is really important. And not only time, being able to work maybe different times, you're working with maybe East Coast people, West Coast people, Central. When you're working remote, you may need to take meetings really late depending on that, but also your workplace. So working remote, but also needing to consider the flexibility of, are you going to need to be in office every once in a while? For example, sometimes I would have to do customer tours. So on those days, am I going to be available to go into the office and give tours versus being on meetings and calls with people I know on the East Coast? Other things like Alexis was kind of mentioning, the practical skills. At CDW, especially being a technology company, it's really important to kind of prepare for that if you're going into a technology role, whether that be getting certifications or in general, just buffing up or getting knowledge on the kind of base you're going on. Like she mentioned, security. If you're going into hardware, maybe get A+. And I think something also really important to consider is collaboration. I think collaboration is definitely needed in these remote environments that people could definitely buff up on.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And Tammy, what would you say the audience could do to, help their job search and, stay competitive this year?
I would say be flexible and proactive, right? And I would say pick up the phone. I think a lot of times our world today is online, it's email, it's, that kind of behind the scene communication. And although that works and you get your application out there, don't be afraid to pick up the phone and call that person that you're trying, or that company that you're trying to get an interview for. I think a lot of us have become where it's easy to get that no thanks email or welcome. Don't wait for that. Be proactive, get out there and be your best advocate. That's what I would tell anybody on my team. I think that that's going to keep you, but also be flexible, right? You might think you have one role or one particular job that you're wanting to go for. Broaden your horizons, interview for a few different types of roles, hear all about them, and then kind of make a decision and a plan to go from there. That would be my best guess, because I can tell you I had a prior career before coming to CDW, and I interviewed around back then to kind of see what did I want to do next. Is this just a career change for me, or am I just starting out? I think that path fits for either time that you're at right now in your career, whether you're just beginning or whatever. Be flexible, be open, be proactive, and be your biggest advocate, and pick up the phone.
Awesome.
Mhm.
I love that.
Yeah.
Kirsten, what would you have to provide on that insight?
Yeah,
Oh,
those are,
go ahead. Sorry.
oh, I was going to say your tips were really good. Also important things is maybe doing more company research, doing research on the position itself before you go into it so that you know that the job will actually fit your needs. Maybe the company fits your culture that you want to fit into in the workforce. I would say definitely doing a little bit more research. That way you're spending more time on opportunities that you would, see yourself fulfilling properly, and also that would be fulfilling to you. But I definitely think Tammy's right as far as it's really important, maybe talking to the recruiter. If you know somebody who works at the company, asking them what the culture is like, what the position's like, if they work with that department, for example, it can be really important to do some research.
Absolutely. And then Alexis, would love to hear your thoughts on, how the audience could, adapt their job search and stay competitive this year as, we're going into this second year of being virtual.
Absolutely. And again, thank you for the question. I think it's definitely an interesting market right now as far as there being a certain number of openings and a certain number of, folks that are open to kind of hearing about other opportunities. So I love this question because I think it's really important to kind of figure out, not only where you stand, but then kind of extra steps that you can take or, extra efforts that you can put in as far as distinguishing yourself from, the competition or that candidate pool. So to respond to that question, I would say, and I know it may seem very trivial and it may seem like, something very small, but I would definitely recommend, first and foremost, to Kirsten's point, reviewing the description in its entirety, whatever you're considering, and really aligning that with your experience. So really being able to kind of pull out key areas, if there is a specific, role in mind that you're curious about or maybe what they're thinking about pursuing. I'd say from a general career standpoint, I would definitely recommend utilizing your network and leaning heavily on that. I think Kirsten may have mentioned it as far as reaching out and speaking to a recruiter or someone to kind of get a feel for some of the areas that may not necessarily be listed in the description. I think it's great to be able to lean on your network. I mean, we build so many relationships throughout the previous organizations that we've supported, just naturally in the market, connecting with other individuals that are also very passionate and interested in the same types of things that you're interested in. So lean on those folks, don't be afraid to ask questions. I think another thing that could be very valuable is if you are currently working right now somewhere else and it's maybe not where you see yourself long term, if it is a technology role or if there are opportunities to like shadow other team members or potentially just more of that collaboration, I think that really goes a long way, not only in terms of who you know, but what you're learning and how sound that information is as well. So I think there's a lot of resources out there, even if, for instance, I talked to a lot of candidates that, like I mentioned, maybe they are looking for a specific role that they're not necessarily in right at the moment. There's so many different resources available online that could be either free or, there could be some sort of fee to where it'll kind of help you either study for certain material or develop certain skills outside of your current role and kind of what your expectations are there. So to summarize, I'd say as it relates to a general job search, I definitely would recommend leaning on your network and definitely building the relationships with anyone that could potentially help you learn more about whatever that skill set or whatever that is that you're looking to kind of go for.
Absolutely. So some big takeaways, be open, be flexible, do your research on, the organization that you're looking into or the job role. Those are all great bits and pieces and best practices for prospective candidates. So in that same vein, what could candidates do, Kirsten, to make their applications and resumes stand out against others?
Yeah, because that's really the first point of contact almost for everybody with the hiring team. So make it easy to read for sure, because one, the person reading it and verifying your information is going to be looking over it. And as long as you make it an easier job for them, it's going to be way better for you. And also, if you're going to bring it to your interview as a reference point, or to point out certain key facts. That way you can read over it yourself, maybe to give examples. I've done that in interviews before where I say, oh, well, you can look under, this objective, what I've done here for this project. And it's easier for people to see. Also, I would recommend taking the dates off of education, certifications, things like that. I would just say whether they're active or ongoing or completed. That's pretty much mine, because if you're fresh out of school and they can look at that date and say, oh, that's really fresh, I don't know, does this person have the experience? And that was what I faced when I went out of technology school. And so once I removed the dates and I just said, these certifications are active and this is a completed degree program, it helped me a lot, and it gave a talking point instead of them just saying, oh, that's a really fresh date, I don't know. So, and then if it makes sense, have a bit of personality put on your resume. Some are strictly the black and white, just one font, but if you can be creative and you're going to a creative role, definitely show a little bit of your personal flair.
Absolutely. I know the first thing I was removing was my GPA. I was like, when do I get to the point in my career when I can remove this off of my resume? Just messing. Alexis, what's some advice that you could give applicants to help them stand out against others?
Sure. Yeah. Great question. I think the first thing, specifically when it comes to like an application or a resume, is really making sure that it's properly formatted. To Kirsten's point, like for instance, on CDW's career site, when you upload your resume, you can do it as some sort of Word version, PDF, or you can choose the HTML version. And I think the HTML version might be a little bit easier and kind of simpler from a user perspective as far as uploading it and just kind of getting it in there. But I think as far as the talent acquisition side, if it is an HTML version, it can be really difficult to read and kind of follow along even before I'm even reaching out to have a conversation with the candidate. So I would definitely make sure that formatting is great. To Kirsten's point, you definitely want to ensure that it's easier to read on the eyes. I think there's definitely a misconception that I want to debunk right now as far as one-page resumes. Definitely not, I feel like, required by any means. I don't know where that started, but I feel like that's something that I hear a lot of candidates share with me is, I really want my resume to be one page. I've removed all this information to make it one page. And granted, you definitely don't want your resume to be 50 pages, right? But I'd say 1 to 2, 3 is even fine. I feel like depending upon, again, it really, I feel like boils down to what information you're including on it. Is it relevant? And one thing that I know it can be a little bit of an extra step and it can definitely take a little bit more time. But I always recommend if there's a role that you're going for and there is any, maybe there are minor adjustments or edits or updates that you can kind of tweak a little bit in order to better relate to the actual role. I always think that's great, right? So even if, for example, it could be something as simple as, you read in the description that they're in this type of environment, and then you draw that parallel on your resume, also kind of showcasing what that environment has looked like for you in previous employers. I just think it's really great to be able to, like most folks, when they're looking at your resume and they're going through your application on the TA side, they are looking for kind of key technologies or key projects. Granted, you could definitely still be very qualified for the role if you don't have those key technologies, but typically when it's coming from a hiring leader, they're going to be looking for, kind of key components depending upon why the role's open and all that good stuff. So I would definitely recommend, ensuring that it's properly formatted. If it is a technical role, highlighting any technologies, both in the body and the skills section of your resume. I think sometimes I'll speak with applicants and they'll say, oh yeah, it's in the skills section, but I think a lot of times with it being listed, they really want to understand kind of what you've done with those specific technologies, if applicable. Last but not least, I always think it's great when I see folks with like their selfie on their resume. I don't know why. I just think it's some pictures are really great and kind of comical, but I like to throw that in there because if you're someone that, thinks that would benefit you or that, you feel good about that, then fine. Definitely not a requirement by any means, but it's always great to kind of see a little bit.
I love that. And great to know, that resumes don't have to stay, or that you've debunked it, that resumes aren't limited to one page, because, once I got to a certain point in my career, I felt that I needed to eliminate some of my experience just to squeeze it into that one page. So that's great to hear. And I appreciate you shedding light on that. Tammy, did you want to add anything to that?
I can add just a little bit, Alexis, I absolutely agree with you 1,000%. Draw those parallels from the job description into your resume. And a trend that I've been seeing over the last few years is there's this summary up at the top before it goes into all of the specific career paths that you've had. You're your biggest advocate. Brag. Know what the skill sets they're looking for. Don't be afraid to say, give a few bullet points. Don't make the summary too long, but what are the top 3 or 4 things that you know that this role is looking for that you have? Brag about it right up front, and then go into the career. And again, Alexis, drawing those comparable or those parallel lines, that's a very big positive that we look for, because that's our first touch point, if you will, for an applicant. A lot of times is that resume that comes across. So
absolutely. Well, thank you all for sharing insights on that. So switching gears a little bit, in Fairy God Boss's latest job seeker survey, most women said that the most frustrating part about searching for jobs is being ghosted. Alexis, why do you think ghosting happens, and what can applicants do to avoid it?
That is a really great question. And it's really unfortunate that I feel like I talked to a lot of candidates, and they mention, experiences that they've had with other organizations or just in general. And it's really unfortunate to hear. So if you have been ghosted, first, I just want to apologize, because it's definitely no excuse for it. I think there's basic courtesy to kind of reach out and provide updates, even if there's not much of an update. I always feel like no update is still an update. So definitely think that, it's never fun. I think what's really important when it comes to ghosting in terms of why it happens, I think there's a couple of different things that could really go into play. Number one, it could just be something as simple as your email getting lost in an inbox. I mean, we all kind of get cluttered some days, putting out fires, all that good stuff. So it could be something as simple as that. Another example, I think at the end of the day, we all have those, kind of 24 hours in the day. And I think as far as, reasons for why it could happen, I mean, it could be maybe there are other candidates that are also interviewing to where there's no update yet, or that it's coming, or just things like that. But to navigate around that, I think, naturally we all have a lot to do on our plates just with the nature of our roles, but really kind of I think Tammy might have mentioned a little bit earlier, but being really proactive with your communication and things like that really go a long way. But like I said, definitely want to assure ghosting is not great. It's not fun to be ghosted. It's not fun to be the one getting ghosted. And I think just with the nature of so many roles and so many candidates, sometimes it can get a little lost in translation. But that communication from you definitely kind of helps navigate that if it does end up happening.
Absolutely. I always think that even just a simple rejection email is much more appreciated and goes a lot further along than just not hearing anything at all. Tammy, what are your thoughts on why some applicants, may be ghosted, or, some ways that they can avoid it entirely?
Yeah, I would agree with Alexis again. Like, it happens. Life is busy. Companies are, especially the last couple of years, we've been going through a pandemic, and I think companies have had to stop and start and shift and move, and and it, unfortunately, it depends on if you're caught in that one of those timelines or those episodes. But I would say for the most part, that's where, going back to the resume, look for something that's going to stand out. Organize your resume, get the data on there that's going to make you stand out for the role that you're applying for. I don't know if that not standing out resumes is what would make something be ghost or someone to ghost, but it is unfortunate, but it does happen. And when it does, then just be your biggest advocate again and keep going. I mean, that's the best advice I can give for that.
I love that.
Yeah.
Keep your head up, keep applying.
Yep.
And Kirsten?
Yeah, both Tammy and Alexis both had really good points on being proactive and reaching out. I would say, especially after having an interview, you can always use the thank you email as a follow-up kind of too. You send the thank you email, and sometimes you might get ghosted because maybe you didn't represent yourself the best in the interview. Like, we can assume something might have happened where you were overwhelmed, maybe you got nervous, maybe you didn't mention things right. So during the thank you letter, that's happened to me before. I've always reminded them almost subtly of why I'm a prime candidate. And you can look back to your resume like Tammy mentioned, and you can just summarize things maybe they've mentioned, like, oh, for this position, we're looking for this. And you can say in your thank you letter, thank you for your time. And then hit on some of the things they've brought up, like you're looking for a go-getter. And, you know, due to this experience I had in my past, which you can reference, I think that I can definitely fulfill that position in the role and definitely help out in these key projects maybe they're looking at or maybe mentioned, and just using the interview and your resume as a guide during a follow-up to try to put yourself back in there in case maybe you didn't mention something or you forgot. You can add documents if it's relevant, such as a presentation maybe you made, 30, 60, 90, career map, depending on what position you're going for, if those are relevant.
Awesome. No, I love all of that. So,
Sorry,
you know,
Luis, I had one thing that I wanted to add just with that
yeah,
question
absolutely.
along the same lines. I think Kirsten's point is absolutely accurate. And it made me think of one other thing. And I think it's really, I love it when I'm talking to a candidate on the initial, recruitment screen, and they say, well, Alexis, when should I follow up with you if I don't hear back? That question is like a game changer for me, because it allows me to kind of hold myself accountable. And I feel like it builds a greater trust and rapport between myself and any applicants that I'm working with, to be able to set very clear expectations early on, like initially on that first, thing. And if things are changing, then fine. I think, and one other point that I wanted to mention that I really appreciate when candidates, support me in this way, is really reaching out in multiple methods of communication. So to what I mentioned earlier, email gets super cluttered. Maybe it's a LinkedIn message really quickly. Hey, Alexis, really enjoyed speaking with you, something like that. It could be a quick phone call if you have time, but just kind of using other methods. I think sometimes we, to Tammy's point, rely very heavily on email, and then it gets cluttered and we're like, we can't get to any of our emails. Well, definitely feel free to reach out to me in any other way.
I love that. And that was definitely a great tidbit to add in there. So, reach out in multiple platforms, send a postcard if you have to. Well, great. Well, Alexis, kind of on that same vein of, if given the opportunity to interview, what are some best ways that we can convey, our specific skills in an interview? What are some things that, we should say as applicants, as well as, how can we market ourselves?
That's a really great question. And I think we've been kind of touching on it, throughout this entire session, but I really think it's having very clear, concrete examples. I think a lot of times when I'm talking to candidates, we can all kind of speak more high level or kind of like theoretically, like, oh yeah, our team has done this, or this is an example of, a project that our team has worked on, things like this, but really kind of getting down to the nitty gritty individual like contribution. So I know this was the overarching project, but can we kind of hone in on specifically what your role was in that, right? If there was a specific phase or aspect of the project that you were owning or most closely supporting, things like that. I really find a lot of value in those direct examples, because again, when I'm looking at resumes, I'm kind of gathering, whatever my own perception is, but I think kind of having those concrete examples to then provide that supplemental information is great when I'm having conversations with hiring leaders regarding, your experience as a prospective applicant. So I think clear examples is definitely the way to go in the interview, as well as, to my point, what I mentioned a little bit earlier, kind of setting some of those clear expectations early on. That way you're very comfortable knowing what the process is. And if you do have questions along the way, you feel comfortable with the rapport that you built with that initial point of contact.
Absolutely. And Kirsten, I'd love to know, your thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, so obviously great advice. What I think could really help to market yourself, if you have special skills that you could see parallel into the role you're applying for that they're not really asking for. And this could come from maybe a previous job experience you've had, like software development. Maybe you have a software development tool you can use to make the job more efficient, depending on the application you're going for. Maybe you have graphic design skills and you show them a really great presentation based around the products they're using. It really depends, obviously, on the position you're applying for, right? But really marketing, things that make you special, maybe hobbies you have that you've done research outside of that are relevant to the role, such as software development. Maybe you've taken classes in Java and you create a like API or something. Just really things that you can bring to the table that even if someone else is bringing it, you know yourself is special, and that can help the position and give you that memorability.
Awesome. I love that. And Tammy?
I would say, again, I keep going back to be your biggest advocate. Don't be afraid to put your skill sets up front in the interview. You know, you're interviewing us as much as we're interviewing you. So, you know, be sure, don't be afraid to say, I am going to bring to the table this. And when you walk into an interview, assume the sale. And when you leave and you're done with the interview, the biggest tip I give anybody that has asked me for it is when you're leaving the interview, give them the 3 or 4 things that you're going to bring to the team or to that role or to that company. What are you going to bring to the table when you leave? And let them know that that's the last thing they hear as the interview concludes. So I would say that would be something. Don't be afraid to shout those skill sets in the beginning and at the end. And when the interview is done, you will have left them with the last word of, oh, that's what she's going to bring to the table. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Awesome. I love that.
Yep.
And, you know, once we've gotten to that point, you know, Kirsten, what would you say are some of the, you know, best questions that you could ask as an applicant in that interview process?
Yeah, definitely. So some questions I think are really important as you do maybe upfront research into the company. You look into the position and you ask questions. One, you want to know the answer to that are practical, the onboarding process, things of that nature. But if you care about, you know, the culture of the workplace, ask questions about how the culture is. If you care about consistency or flexibility of schedules, definitely find ways to bring that up. Also, you could ask questions that, for me, I ask leading questions during the interview about things to kind of, like Tammy's point, brag a little bit about myself or about a skill I do have, or things I could bring to the role. For example, for my current position, I basically asked permission to do a project that they weren't going to ask me to do. So, hey, we do tours, but right now COVID's going on. Can I create a virtual tour and like pilot that with you guys and show you that? And they were just impressed almost that I thought critically of myself in the position and thought of a solution to something that currently they're having a problem with, right? And you don't even have to overpromise you doing something for the role, but I think people really like to see the passion and see someone really put themselves in that role and passively throw out something that they could bring to the role. And then to mask it as a question like, is this something you're interested in? Or is this the direction you guys would like to see certain projects to go in? Things like that.
That's awesome. Yeah. Everyone loves, you know, when someone's taking initiative, especially when they're not asked, which is great. So I love that. Alexis, do you have any ideas or insight on some best questions that applicants can ask in the interview process?
Sure. Yeah, I think one question that I always really appreciate when you know, candidates will ask is kind of understanding a little bit more about the like formal processes that CDW follows. I think that's great, and I think a really like effective tactic is to, as you move through the interview process, to try to use certain jargon and language that you're hearing throughout interviews to then kind of build off of that. Now, granted, don't go, you know, saying things that like you don't really know, you know, like you're not sure. But if there are things that you're picking up on that you think could be insightful, that you pick up on in one interview, feel free to kind of use that as like a common thread almost and say, oh yeah, in my previous interview, I was speaking with you know, Joe Smith, and he mentioned, you know, this was a process that CDW does. Would you mind elaborating a little bit more? I think it kind of shows that you're thinking critically in between interview steps, which I think can go a long way. Sometimes we, you know, have the interview, we shut our computer, we're done, you know, we're like on to the next, or either I'm not being, you know, selected for whatever reason. But I really think kind of that critical thinking piece in between steps is really great. And then I know personally, when I was interviewing way back when, I was a horrible interviewee. Like I would completely nerves would get the best of me, like all that good stuff. So I'm always great about, encouraging candidates to, while they're in an interview, if they're answering a question and they're not sure if they're hitting the mark or they can't really tell or gauge, really kind of taking a pause and saying, did I answer your question thoroughly? Or kind of checking in with your interviewer. I think that's great to be able to give you some guidance and direction as you go. That way you're not waiting until the end to be like, oh man, maybe I should have done this, or tried to kind of pivot the conversation a little bit differently. I think the only other thing as far as questions that I get asked and that I know other hiring leaders get asked and they really appreciate it, is kind of what the management style looks like on the team. I think that's a question that some folks don't really think about too often, but when they do, I think it's because it is a little bit more of a rarity. It's something to where it's very easily recognized. And I think hiring leaders appreciate it in terms of getting feedback and kind of anticipating, what your expectations are coming into the role and coming into the organization. So definitely, lots of questions that you could ask. And just one last thing I'd say is definitely kind of having questions prepared in advance. I think it makes all the difference when you have at least one or two, and that way you can kind of start creating some others as you go, as opposed to, just starting from complete scratch and trying to figure out what your questions will be as you go.
That's awesome. Thank you for that. I know we hear from our community that, it can feel more challenging to do virtual, video interviews versus making in-person connections. Tammy, do you have any advice for candidates, to best present themselves, to make genuine connections in virtual interviews?
Yeah, I would say be your authentic self, sit forward. You see me sitting forward quite a bit. Like, I am present. Like, that's what you want to come across. If anything, you want to make sure that they know you're present. And, I talk with my hands, so I tuck them in a lot of times so that I don't, but be your authentic self, because that's what we want to see. And right now in the world that we're in, a lot of it is video. And so it's not as personal to reach out and shake a hand and so on. But sit, you want to have a quiet place, yes, and you want to be prepared and be ready. But the most important thing I can tell you is be yourself, sit forward, be present. And, remember, you're interviewing them as much as we're interviewing you. You're interviewing us. So, some of those questions to ask, what's challenging about the team? What do you see? What are some successes? Don't be afraid to make sure that you're remembering you're getting to know them just as much as they are you. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And Kirsten, do you have any suggestions for best ways candidates can present themselves?
Yeah, and I'm really glad Alexis brought up the fact that sometimes it can be really nerve-wracking. So my advice really is about preparation for kind of a worst case scenario. So since a lot of them are remote and they're video, technology can cut off, and that's totally happened to me during an interview. So what I like to do is I like to have the invite up on my phone, and I like to have it connected to cellular data only and have it ready to go in case my laptop just completely disconnects from the internet, so that I can always rejoin and say, hey, I'm so sorry I got disconnected. And then if something like a hiccup like that happens, to not let it completely derail your interview, because it can be super stressful. And then you might get extra nervous. These things happen during meetings, and anyone who's been in a remote environment right now totally knows that there are times that technology fails you. So if that happens, have a backup and then not let it get in your head, to always be like, this happens, they know it happens, and be able to smoothly and confidently go back into that interview.
Absolutely. And just, that nature of working from home and having interruptions. I know I was on a call yesterday and my apartment building was testing the fire alarm for 5 minutes. And I was like, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to call you back. I was not expecting this. And then my dog was losing his mind, and it's not something I planned for, but, I hopped back on the call, 10 minutes after that, and was very apologetic, but they were like, it's totally fine. Things like this happen, we're all kind of in this together. So, it's great to hear that preparation is key. I know we've talked a lot about how to market ourselves in the best way possible. What are some great questions to ask in the interview process? How do we make our resume stand out against others? But Alexis, I'd like to hear some, advice that you have on things not to do. So what are some big mistakes that you've seen through the interview process, whether it be on resumes or just, applying in general?
Great question, man. You guys, I have stories. No, I'm kidding. But what I would say is that I definitely think, something that's really, really, really important, and I've seen it happen so many times. We'll start with the application side. Again, just making sure that your resume is properly formatted. We talked a little bit about that before. Also on the application side, similarly to the different versions I was talking about, HTML versus PDF, and just ensuring that the fonts are similar, there's no crazy colors, things like that. Those types of things can really be distracting, right, from your actual experience. So while colors is great, in terms of background and templates that folks use, all those good things are great. But when it comes to the legible kind of written, you want to make sure that, folks can read that and easily grasp what you're trying to convey. I would also say specifically on the applying side would be, just not completing the application in its entirety. Like that's something very simple that can kind of show that initiative, your attention to detail, like in it, granted, we're all doing things quickly, right? So like it could be an easy mistake, but I really think kind of taking your time with an application really does go a long way. Now, if we flip over to the interviewing side, I would say, and it's common, right? Being punctual is really important. If you're not punctual, feel free to hop on, and not saying that you need to explain a reason, but kind of, giving a little bit of context, saying, oh, I'm so sorry, being apologetic, or sharing some insight as to if you were having difficulties, maybe there's some sort of feedback that the team needs to know about as far as the interview, the way that it was set up and things like that. So really just making sure that you're able to communicate that. I think another area is having zero questions. A little bit earlier, we talked about having questions and how it, can, with the way that it, I think sometimes comes across to a hiring leader as far as your engagement, your excitement, all that good stuff. When you have zero questions throughout the entire interview process, it may be, hey, were you, picking up the information that we were putting down? Do you understand? Are you following us? That kind of thing. And then last but not least, I mentioned it a bit earlier, but having your nerves kind of impact your ability to answer questions. I can definitely attest to, there have been, several examples where in an interview, someone completely draws blank, or, and I don't think that's a mistake that you can't recover from, right? You absolutely can. It's just kind of shifting that mindset a bit. But I would say overall, lots of mistakes that can be made, so many components that go into an interview and applying. So you just really want to make sure that you're taking your time, that you're, to Kirsten's point, kind of giving yourself that whatever preparation you need, asking the necessary questions, so that way you're really setting yourself up for success.
Absolutely. And Tammy, did you want to go over some big mistakes that you've seen through the interview process?
Sure. I would say the nerves is probably the biggest piece that we see, right? People shut down when they feel that they're not getting across, or they're not coming across or articulating what they're wanting to say as well as they thought they should. That it's okay to ask for a pause. One moment, please. Can I think on that for a moment? And just give themselves a 10, 15 second window just to regroup, because we all get nervous. We've all had interviews where we've done really well and we've done really bad, even personally. And you can get talking on an example and giving it an example you're talking through, and you forget where you're at because your nerves are getting to you. Don't shut down. That's my biggest piece of advice. Speak up, be authentic, and say, hey, can I have just one moment? Let me think on that. We don't need to be told you're taking a 15-second, okay, I got to get my level set here with myself, but it gives you enough time just simply to kind of reset and jump back in. So we're all human. Again, I keep going back to, you're getting to know them as much as we're getting to know you. Just be your authentic self. But if you feel yourself shutting down, that's probably the biggest thing I see. Just be sure you give yourself that 10 seconds or whatever you need just to reset. It's okay. It is okay.
Absolutely. Don't be afraid to, take that pause. So I know, women in our Fairy God Boss community give CDW a 4.5 wings out of 5, and 92% would recommend CDW to other women. Kirsten, can you talk about the culture at CDW and how it supports and advances their women employees?
Yeah, and I'm really glad I got this question, to be honest, because that was the most important thing for me when I was looking into companies and into positions, was the culture of the company and how they build their people up. And CDW is really great at that. And I really recommend them for this fact that when you become a member or a coworker of CDW, right, they have so many great programs like tuition reimbursement, so you can go back to college and pursue degrees or certificates to help boost yourself up within the actual company and maybe change departments, as well as our BRGs, right? So we have charitable groups, we have other diversity initiatives, as well as our Women's Opportunity Network, which is one of those BRGs that specifically helps women and is a network that holds master classes for women employees, male if they want to join too. Like we're not excluding anybody. And then also events centered around career development and helping women in the workplace. I think that's really great. One I really enjoyed was there was a master class recently. Oh man, it was about imposter syndrome and how to get over it. And that was super helpful. And we have a lot of things like that, and like monthly newsletter for Women's Opportunity Network specifically.
That's awesome. And Tammy, is there anything you'd like to add to that of, the overall culture at CDW and how it supports and advances their women employees?
Sure. To Kirsten's point, right, our culture is, we have a code that we actually go by called the CDW way. And one of the ways that I have seen especially for women in our thing is empower. I have been empowered by the people that I have worked for and with, and that is what we continue to do. That empowerment to do your jobs, to grow, to do classes like what Kirsten was saying and go a different direction. The culture here is we're all here for you, to support you, and we are here to empower you. And that was probably that is one of our codes, and that's one that I strive with every single day.
Awesome.
Mhm.
And then Alexis, I wanted to discuss with you, specific tips and insight that you could give about the interview or what the interview process typically looks like for CDW.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. So obviously it's going to vary, right, depending on the specific role that you're interviewing for at the time. But I can definitely kind of traditionally lay out what a process could look like. So you would always start with obviously applying first. Typically, your next step would be to speak with a recruiter on our talent acquisition team like myself. Traditionally, we have different openings or requisitions that we support at one time. So you'll want to make sure that you're speaking to the right recruiter as it relates to, the role that you're most interested in. That way they can provide any questions, clarity, things like that. Usually after that interview, you would then have some sort of form of technical interview. Traditionally, we will have you speak with, it'll be more on like the peer-to-peer level. So it could be a fellow engineer that you're speaking with if you are going for an engineering role. It could be, let's say it's a project manager role. You could be speaking to a PMO lead instead. So we like to be able to expose you to more of a technical type of interview to further assess what your skills are there and how they align with the opening. Traditionally, we do have you speak with the hiring manager directly as well. Usually, most of our interviews have been virtual just with the nature of the pandemic, but I know previously we were doing, in person and things like that. But traditionally during the hiring manager interview, I like to say it's a little bit more kind of process oriented, to where a lot of my hiring leaders are looking to kind of understand how were things done at your previous organization, or kind of what contributions, what processes are you familiar with as it relates to whatever is at hand in the description. And then traditionally, depending on the level of the role, I've seen it to where we've had final round interviews be more of a panel style if it is more of a senior level role, where they may be in like some sort of leadership capacity to be able to get more of a general consensus. Traditionally, I have seen right after that, hiring manager interview, they are ready to make a decision. I have seen it to where, again, for more senior level roles, we recommend that you speak with like our VP or almost like director level for that specific org or that group. The main purpose in the interview steps is to really be able to provide a realistic job preview for you. So we like to kind of have you speak with different folks that you could be collaborating with on a day-to-day basis, although they may not necessarily be on your team. We like to be able to expose you to the different aspects of your role, whatever that looks like. So traditionally, we'll have you speak to a couple different folks that kind of sit in different areas to be able to really provide that overall perspective to make sure that you have all the information that you need.
Awesome. Thank you so much for providing that, preview into the, CDW's interview process. I did want to take some time to, answer some of the audience questions. So I'm going to open it up to, all three of you. So, feel free to, whoever wants to volunteer to take the question. But first question I see is, what's the best way to fit a cover letter that you're making a career change? And though you may not have all the experience to convince the company you're the right fit. So how do we, work on
Alexis,
that?
Do you want to take, I was just gonna say, Alexis, do you want to take that one simply because you are kind of that first team that intakes those resumes?
Sure, absolutely. So traditionally, to Tammy's point, your talent acquisition recruiter would be looking at the resumes prior to, making recommendations. So usually what I'd say in a cover letter, specifically on our career site, there will be a place where you can upload any other attachment. So it doesn't have to be a resume. If you have certifications, to Kirsten's point a little bit earlier, that you'd like to upload, some folks will upload references or, recommendation letters, things like that. So you could definitely include your cover letter in that attachment piece. Or I have seen it also to where some candidates have just looped it in on their resume as well, to where the first page is your cover letter, and then it just seamlessly kind of transitions. But I will say, I think for roles that maybe you don't have all the areas of experience, or maybe, you have one out of however many, I think a lot of times those are the types of scenarios where you leaning on your network could really benefit you as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Next question. Do you like to know the reason for a gap in a resume written in the resume, or is it something you prefer to explore during the screening or the interview?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I can take that one. And Tammy, feel free to, or Kirsten, feel free to hop in. But I would say traditionally, I think I like to have those type of conversations over the phone. I think it's great to kind of see it on a resume as far as those initial screens go when we are looking at resumes. But if you're not someone that feels comfortable doing that, definitely don't feel like you have to by any means. I'm someone that when I get you over the phone, a lot of times we're talking about a lot of other areas that, could potentially that could come up, or, things that may be outside your family, things like that. So lots of things can be discussed in that initial conversation. But traditionally, I wouldn't say it's required to have that on your resume. I think once you do get to that initial step with the recruiter, they may ask, and I would just say answer as openly and transparently as you feel or as you see fit. But outside of that, it's definitely not required by any means, no.
I would just add, that a lot of times for me as an interviewer, so take this for, something you could turn into what you would do. But me as an interviewer, I will say, start out an interview and just kind of say, I've already looked at the resume. Tell me a little bit about your career, your past, your history, and what's led you here today. And that opens the door for a lot of conversation. And hey, I was stayed at home for a few years, and then I came back to the work world. It opens up that opportunity I have found for people to kind of just hit it right out of the park up front. And it's not something that's sitting there on the table that they're just waiting for someone to ask. So feel free to turn that into something that you could use and say, sure, I can talk a little bit about myself and how I got here today. What brings me to this opportunity? Turn that and kind of go back to your interviewer that you're speaking to and tell them, yeah. And that way you take it off the table. You've touched on it. And if the interviewer has any more questions or really wants to kind of tell me more about that, that opens the door to the opportunity, but at least you've put it out there and talked. That's how if I see a gap, that's what me as an interviewer does. So take that and go the other way. Mm-hmm.
Kirsten, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I definitely like Tammy's recommendation, and to kind of take the power back and and as Alexis said, as comfortable as you feel, bring up whatever you're doing. Because there's a lot of reasons there could be a gap. You could be going to school, you could have been starting your own business, maybe you did research into a different field, and you don't necessarily have to go into everything and every detail about that, but like Tammy said, kind of bringing up your journey, and if there are gaps that you feel could be relevant, like, oh, I did research into this, or I went to school and did classes for something relevant, you know, that's definitely something to bring up, especially if you're like, oh, I was going to school, I'm currently doing a bachelor's degree or something, to explain the gap and show that also you're interested in learning more. Because I think workplaces are definitely interested when people applying show that they have the initiative and they want to stay relevant and also learn different skills.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for answering some of those audience questions. It looks like we got 3 minutes left. I wanted to thank you all, Alexis, Kirsten, Tammy, for participating in today's discussion. And before we go, I wanted to see if everyone could give their best piece of advice they've ever received. So Tammy, if you wanted to kick us off.
Sure. Best, and I've said it a couple of times today, assume the sale. Remember, you're getting to know them as much as they're getting to know you. If you go in with that mindset, it's a collaboration and a chance to get to know each other, to see if it's going to be a fit for the role and for the team. And leave the interview with them knowing, what do you want them to walk away knowing that you're going to bring? Give them that final. So when you are done with the interview and you've left, they go, that's what I remember. She's bringing this, this, and this, right? Best piece of advice I've ever gotten was in that entirety. And it's worked very well. And I've gotten, and I share that with everybody that I am empowering to go and find their next path.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Kirsten, of course.
Yeah, I mean, it seems really straightforward, but the best advice I got that I could give is, honestly, I know. I was working with a mentor and they said, just tell yourself that before you go into the interview. You know who you are, you know your skills, right? So you shouldn't be nervous about that. You should be able to speak to what you do confidently because you know yourself and what you have accomplished, right? You should do research into the company so that you know the company and you know maybe initiatives they have, maybe you know what charitable things they do that you can talk about, and give yourself more time to have that collaboration and have them remember you as someone who did the research. And you should know the position. So I know the position, I know my skills, and I know this company that I'm going into as much as possible, of course. But I know it's really simple, but that really helped me a lot when I was looking for a position and doing my research for it. That helped me pretty much ace the interview. I ended up getting this role right out of school. So, and it helped by knowing all those things.
Awesome. Awesome. And last but not least, Alexis, what's the best piece of advice anyone's ever given you?
Yeah, no, I would say know your audience. I think that is a really important component when it comes to knowing what they want to know and knowing what's valuable to them. I think also just remembering that, a lot of times people won't really remember what you do for them, but really how you made them feel. So I really make it a point throughout every step in the process, even if it's just, an application, if it's talking to someone, if it's passing along something else, you really want to make sure that you're creating a great experience and really being able to, showcase all that you have to offer. So I really think that's important in terms of knowing your audience and really just believing in yourself and being your authentic self.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. Thank you so much for joining today's discussion. We really appreciate it.